Watch right now on the Front News Project. Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, meat grinder assaults by the Russian army. The Ukrainian armed forces are eliminating the invaders. Exclusive footage. Hell in Ternopil. Russia is killing adults and children. This is real genocide. Long-range Flamingo and Neptune missiles strike Russian military targets. A blackout awaits Moscow. Fiery, intense, and blazing frontline footage. Watch it right now. Greetings. Vladimir Timoshenko here with you, and we begin right away with the most terrifying news. Hell in Ukrainian Ternopil, dozens dead, including 3 children and more than 70 wounded. In the early hours of Wednesday, November 19th, Russia launched another massive combined strike on Ukraine. And yes, it was Ternopil that found itself at the epicenter of the Russian terrorist attack. Our colleagues from the television news service will tell and show you more about this horror in detail.
Russian missiles and Shaheds attacked residential buildings at 7 in the morning. In this building, the occupiers destroyed the top 4 floors.
The sound of the Shaheds is like a mosquito. At first it flies separately, then it gets closer, and when it falls you can hear that a drone is dropping, flying down. The rockets were also very loud with their characteristic whistling sound.
The rescue operation continued all day. The number of victims kept rising. The people under the building aren't talkative. They pray that their loved ones are alive.
I don't know what's happened to him. I don't know what's happened to him. I don't know. They're on the 6th floor, but I see that their section is intact. Well, where their apartment is.
Is there any contact with them?
No, there isn't. I just came to see my sister, but I stepped aside because my phone rang.
Are all your loved ones safe?
Yes, everything's fine.
Can I talk to her?
I don't know whether she'll be able to speak at this point.
Nearly 200 rescuers were working at the site of the collapse. Among them were dog handlers and psychologists. There are more than 20 people whose relatives can't reach them. Among them is a 20-year-old man. After several hours, rescuers find him among the rubble and try to reach him, talking to him constantly.
The rescuers keep in constant contact with him. As you can see, they are constantly working up above. Unfortunately, at this location, we can see that the structures from the 4th to the 9th floor have been destroyed.
And here is the moment of an incredible rescue. The young man who was trapped for half a day is alive. Ambulances are standing nearby. Medics are taking away the injured. This is another building that was hit by enemy fire. You can see that they're still putting out the fire here, even though 5 or 6 hours have passed since the strike. There are also dead and wounded here. While some are clearing the rubble in search of people, others are removing debris and covering the windows with plastic sheeting.
Private entrepreneurs have come together in groups of 4. A locksmith, a carpenter, an engineer, whoever knows how to work with their hands.
What are you doing right now?
We're covering the windows. We took some plastic sheeting and are covering the windows to keep it warm.
The industrial warehouses nearby were also attacked. There's a cloud of smoke over Ternopil. People have put on masks. The concentration of harmful substances exceeds the norm by 6 times.
All residents of the Solnechny neighborhood must keep their windows closed and not go outside unless absolutely necessary. All emergency and rescue services are working here on site. Right now, residents need plastic sheeting, building materials, and shelter.
The stalls of a small market near the houses have been destroyed.
All the goods are damaged, everything is broken. Further down, we have clothing. Most of what we have is cosmetics. All glass items, perfumes, electronics, everything is shattered.
Are you not going to open, or will you still try to work?
No, of course we won't open. Where would we go?
The elementary school, just a few dozen meters from the bombed-out apartment building, was also damaged.
The windows and doors are damaged.
Were the windows blown out?
Yes, the windows in the school were blown out, 20 windows.
And the Shaheds? The missiles were flying straight into a densely populated residential area. All schools and kindergartens in this residential area canceled classes and switched to remote learning. Due to damage to the heating system, the neighborhood was left without heat. But after lunch, new air measurements no longer detected any harmful substances, only an increased level of combustion products.
And now an analysis of the current situation on the long-suffering Pokrovsk front line. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues here as well. On the Pokrovsk front, since the beginning of the day, the occupiers have attempted to advance on the positions of Ukrainian units 55 times. The aggressor operated in the areas of the settlements of Shakov, Novoe Shakovo, Pankivka, Nikanorivka, Chervony Lyman, Rodinske, Mirnohrad, Novoekonomichne, Rivne, Pokrovsk, Novopavlivka, Novonikolaiivka, Filia, Dakhna, and in the direction of the settlement of Hrishain. Fighting is still ongoing in 4 locations. Yes, Pokrovsk and Kupyansk continue to remain at the center of hostilities. At the same time, just think about it. The armed forces of the Russian Federation are using the civilian population in Pokrovsk as a human shield. This is evidenced by intercepted Russian radio communications. And in Kupyansk, the Russian army still hasn't managed to secure its so-called criminal success despite various propaganda stunts. Here are the details. Pokrovsk played a cruel trick on the occupiers. While the enemy threw all its forces into a desperate attempt to take control of the ruins of the city destroyed by the Russian army, the Ukrainian armed forces launched a counterattack 200 kilometers to the north in Kupyansk. The enemy forces suffered huge losses there, reports the Ukrainian command, and were forced to retreat.
The enemy was cleared out on the northwestern outskirts. They're not there anymore. And that's a huge achievement.
In fact, the Ukrainian armed forces have cut off the Russian invaders in the northern part of Kupyansk from their main supplies of food, cannon fodder, and ammunition. Next, according to Commander Fedorenko, his unit and adjacent units began identifying the locations of the remaining Russian sabotage groups and clearing them out. As of now, the operation is almost complete.
If you open a map that more or less accurately reflects the current line of contact, you'll see that the enemy forces have been pushed back quite significantly from the northern outskirts of the area. And what does that mean? The farther we are able to drive the enemy military forces away from the northern outskirts of Kupyansk, the less space they have available to send their sabotage groups into the city itself.
But unfortunately, the Ukrainian armed forces cannot boast of such brilliant successes on another of the hottest sections of the front near Pokrovsk or in the city itself. Russian assaults there do not stop day or night. It seems the Kremlin has thrown all its forces into taking the city. Nevertheless, despite all efforts, the Ukrainian command notes that our defenders are heroically holding the line.
The situation in and around Pokrovsk is extremely difficult, but at the same time we're still somehow holding on.
According to the military, most of the city is now in the so-called gray zone. This is when control over the territory constantly shifts from one side to the other and fighting takes place for every building entrance. Sirski also fully understands the complexity of the situation in Pokrovsk. In particular, the commander-in-chief stated that the AFU units and other components of the defense forces continue to carry out their tasks in the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad agglomeration area, despite the fact that enemy activity remains high in this sector.
Enemy activity remains consistently high, but clear coordination and the strong cohesion of our units help us to resist it. We are working to ensure the continuity of our logistics and are taking measures to disrupt the enemy's supply routes.
Nevertheless, the situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains extremely difficult. The enemy, disregarding their own losses, continues to assault AFU positions, the commander-in-chief shares in his operational update.
In just the past 4 days in the Pokrovsk direction, the occupiers' total losses amounted to 487 personnel, of which 350 were irrecoverable. The exchange fund is being replenished with captured Russian soldiers.
For security reasons, the Ukrainian command does not disclose further details about the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. However, they can share information about completed special operations on the front line. For example, the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirilo Budanov, gave an interview in which he shared details of one of the most daring airborne operations by the GUR, during which special forces, having secured certain positions behind enemy lines, managed to break through and establish a full-fledged ground corridor. At that time, Budanov himself was nearby and was directing the operation.
Why was such an operation necessary, and why did it have to be carried out in exactly this way? Because the situation was extremely tense and critical, I want to remind you that all of this happened against the backdrop of official statements from the Russian Federation about the capture of the city. When Gerasimov reported to Putin that the city had been taken, and here you need to understand what the situation was like at that moment. Nothing else would have worked. What we did allowed us to win precious time so that the main units of the armed forces could calmly, or as calmly as possible, approach the city to reinforce it. Let's put it that way.
It is quite possible that even at this very moment, special units of the GUR are carrying out another special operation in the Pokrovsk direction. Military public channels are already reporting on the clearing of Pokrovsk, strikes on enemy supply lines, and the establishment of alternative logistics routes now for the Ukrainian armed forces. So all we can do is wait for official confirmation of good news from the Ukrainian command.
Meanwhile, Russia is rapidly plunging into darkness and cold. Now, every shelling of Ukraine's energy facilities immediately results in mirrored retaliatory strikes. If earlier Ukrainians mainly used drones, now they are deploying their own long-range Flamingo and Neptune missiles. In addition, missiles provided by partners are also performing excellently. For example, the American ATAK-MS. Russian soldiers themselves witnessed their effectiveness firsthand the other day at their own facilities in Voronezh. We will tell you how the war has now reached the territory of these would-be conquerors.
Ukrainian long-range drones are cutting off electricity in the occupied Donbas.
And short charger phones. Looks like they've decided to cut our power everywhere. I've already counted more than 30 of them.
And Ukrainian cruise missiles are temporarily halting the sale of Russian oil at the port of Novorossiysk, causing significant disruption. Ukraine's defense industry is developing rapidly. Kyiv is ramping up its ability to strike deep into Russian territory.
No way! To be honest, seriously.
Look, please. Okay?
Where did we end up? What an incredible ride that was. Damn, do you see that over there?
That's Belgorod. Basically, there's absolutely no power anywhere at all in Belgorod at this time. The entire region is completely without electricity.
The only argument in any negotiations or agreements with the aggressor is a powerful Ukrainian army and large-scale domestic production of long-range strike capabilities.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, yes, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their air force. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at enterprises of the military-industrial complex and the energy system of Russia.
For strikes on the occupiers' military targets in the occupied territories, as well as in Russia's border regions, long-range and rocket drones such as Bars, Palyanitsia, Peklo, FP-1, FP-2 and Luti are mainly used. The scale of strike drone production in Ukraine is such that Russia, including Moscow, is visited by hundreds of drones almost daily. In addition to drones, Ukraine has established the production of its own cruise missiles. We're talking about the long-range Neptune, with an increased range of up to 1,000 kilometers and a warhead of about 260 kilograms. And of course the Flamingo, with a strike range of up to 3,000 kilometers and a warhead weighing 1,000 kilograms.
Usually the warhead of a modern cruise missile is 450, well, at most 500 kilograms. As a rule, almost all missiles have a warhead of 450 kilograms. What does a one-ton warhead provide? When hitting a target, for example, an industrial facility, 2 such missiles will completely disable it for at least a year. That is, there will be a single crater about 20 meters in diameter.
From time to time, Western Allies' weapons are used in strikes on military targets. The British-French Storm Shadow missiles, as well as American ATAK-MS, which the Ukrainian armed forces recently used to strike Voronezh. Guys, we're being bombed. We're being bombed. Recently, Russian energy infrastructure facilities have increasingly come under the crosshairs of the Ukrainian armed forces. By cutting off electricity to Ukrainians, Putin is dooming Russians to blackouts.
Given the climatic conditions of the Russian Federation and the tactical and technical characteristics of the Ukrainian side's strike capabilities, Russia is facing a harsh winter, both literally and figuratively. First and foremost, these are thermal power plants and other production facilities that sustain the livelihoods of major Russian cities.
And now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Alexandrovsk front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. On the Alexandrovsk front, the aggressors attempted to break through the defenses of our defenders 12 times in the areas of the settlements of Alexandrovgrad, Voronoe, Sosnovka, Verbovoe, Zlagoda, Privolnoe, Egorovka, and Krasnogorskoe. The settlement of Velikomikhailovka was also subjected to an airstrike. The trenches have disappeared, and in their place, a deadly gray zone 20 kilometers wide has formed. Drones completely and utterly rule there now. Military analysts are talking about a fundamental change in the rules of warfare. What are the risks for Ukrainian defenders, and why are the armed forces of Ukraine winning the drone war? Let's watch.
A UAV operator from the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade perfectly drops a grenade into a trench with Russian soldiers. One of them tries to throw the explosive out but doesn't make it in time. As a result of the successful drop, several occupiers were eliminated. This is what modern warfare looks like now. There are virtually no assaults or frontal attacks with vehicles. Drones have put an end to positional warfare. That's exactly the headline of an article published by the American outlet Politico.
The fighting in Ukraine no longer resembles the trench warfare of World War I. Instead, drones have erased the continuous front line, creating a kill zone. As a result, a gray zone of chaos has formed, stretching about 20 kilometers from the front line, where drones hunt soldiers. The wounded are left to die, as it is extremely difficult to evacuate them, and delivering ammunition, food and water to the fighting troops is nearly impossible.
The sky above the gray zone is shrouded in smoke from drones. UAVs are equipped with thermal imagers, cameras, bombs and cannons, and some lie in wait for hours on highways, waiting for military vehicles to pass by. At the same time, there is a hunt for UAV pilots who are sitting tens of kilometers away.
We have moved on to a war of drones against drones. Now drones can set up ambushes, intercept enemy logistics systems, and disrupt supply lines. In addition, it has become more difficult to hold positions. If you are detected, all the weaponry in the area will immediately be directed at your destruction. Pavel Palisa, Colonel of the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Russian military public pages are quoting this article, but as always in their own way. Here is one example of Russian propaganda where it is written that Russian drones do not let the Ukrainian armed forces rest, although in reality it's exactly the opposite.
Because of Russian drones, Ukrainian soldiers are forced to stay at their positions for weeks. Drones make evacuation, rotation, and the delivery of ammunition and food deadly dangerous.
Information from open sources shows that it is actually the Russian army that abandons its wounded soldiers instead of evacuating them. Now, Russia is also trying to keep up in the production of various strike UAVs. For example, in frontline areas, the enemy has started using a new type of Iranian drone, the Shahed 101. It has a warhead weighing 8 to 9 kilograms and a flight range of several hundred kilometers. So far, the occupiers have not managed to localize the production of this drone in Russia. The UAVs were produced in 2024 in Iran, but it's only a matter of time. The Russians learn quickly from their mistakes.
We're going head-to-head with them, and they have some really impressive developments. Their science is well established and working. They've managed to suppress and break down, any internal resistance or attempts to oppose the war. And that's why they have these developments, and the machine is running. They were preparing for war. They were buying up. They improved the Shaheds, made Lancets from Israeli drones.
Drones have become so effective that they've even pushed artillery away from the front line and have made it nearly impossible to use armored vehicles to supply the troops.
Drones have become useful for delivery and evacuation, combat reconnaissance, and remote mining, tasks that were previously usually carried out by people in war.
Despite different resource capabilities, Ukraine currently has parity with Russia in drones on the front line, and in some areas even has an advantage. But the development of this military component does not stop for a single minute.
Well then, right now let's move to the Kostyantynivka direction of the front. The Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Kostyantynivka direction, the Russians launched 25 assaults on the positions of Ukrainian units in the areas of Bilahora, Kostyantynivka, Shcherbinivka, Toretsk, Klishchivka, Rusin Yar, Stepanivka, and Sofiivka. Ukrainian defenders repelled all enemy attacks. And now attention. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced the delivery of long-range missiles to Ukraine. Which ones exactly? That will become known very soon. In addition, Ukraine has received its first Terrahawk Paladin anti-aircraft systems. Let's not forget about the unprecedented military aid from Spain. More details about the latest additions to Ukraine's arsenal are coming up in the report.
Even more aid and support, the German Chancellor has promised to equip the Ukrainian army with long-range weapon systems. However, Merz did not disclose details about the number of missiles or the delivery timeline.
For months, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government on implementing long-range fire projects, as we call them technically. The Ukrainian army will be equipped with such weapon systems.
At the same time, the Chancellor refused to answer the question about Germany's previous reluctance to supply Ukraine with long-range Taurus cruise missiles. He called this approach a tactic to increase pressure on the aggressor country, Russia.
The possibility of actually operating the Taurus missiles directly depends on the overall level of training and expertise of the technical personnel involved. So apparently the main point here is that only Bundeswehr servicemen who are specifically trained can currently use the Taurus missiles. Training Ukrainian specialists would take quite a long period of time, likely requiring additional preparation and instruction before they could reach the necessary level of proficiency.
Germany is the largest European donor of military aid to Ukraine. Since the beginning of the war, the government has provided Ukraine with assistance totaling more than 50 billion euros. In September, Berlin launched a new initiative to procure long-range drones jointly with Ukraine's defense industry. Germany will also allocate an additional 150 million euros to purchase weapons from the US for Kyiv.
Germany is well aware of the possibilities of direct military confrontation with the Russian Federation. That is why it is deeply invested in ensuring the defense capability of the Ukrainian state and, accordingly, in the technical rearmament of Ukraine's defense forces.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Air Force has strengthened its air defense with the new British Terrahawk Paladin weapon system. The number of units delivered has not been disclosed, but even a small batch of such systems will significantly enhance Ukraine's air defense.
For the Ukrainian side, this means creating a so-called point air defense system at the moment, that is, protecting key logistical and military facilities from being hit by the enemy's aerodynamic weapons, primarily referring to UAVs. This system is fully mobile and accordingly allows for its redeployment to any location, and given its autonomous operation, this significantly increases Ukraine's ability to counterattacks from the Russian Federation at any given moment in time.
Spain will also allocate 615 million euros to support Ukraine, the lion's share of which will go specifically to military needs.
First and foremost, this is a program for additional arms purchases for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine from the United States. The second is accordingly the strengthening of Ukraine's air defense systems. And accordingly, this concerns the nature of logistical and technical support, including the transfer by the Spanish side of heavy armored vehicles and weaponry that are currently in service with the Spanish army.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used on the front lines. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased by dozens of times.
Ukraine has scaled up the production of the Bogdan self-propelled howitzer to 20 units per month. These are record numbers even for NATO countries. And a distinctive feature is that it uses a modified 155mm caliber. This is the NATO standard. Plus, of course, the price-to-quality ratio. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have increased artillery shell production, and the increase has been record-breaking. And we're talking about scaling up the production of both FPV drones and accordingly strike drones with a target range of over 1,500 kilometers.
Earlier, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the production of domestic weapons, particularly ballistics and drones, is one of the key tasks for the authorities and manufacturers.
It is also worth noting the scaling up of electronic warfare systems and radar production. In this segment, once again, Ukroboronprom holds one of the leading positions in the world, and accordingly the production of naval munitions as well.
All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weaponry capable of destroying important enemy military targets deep behind the front lines.
And now an analysis of the operational situation on the Orikhiv sector of the front. The enemy's army is acting true to form here as well. On the Orikhiv direction, the enemy attacked the positions of our defenders 4 times in the areas of the settlements of Novoandrivka, Stepov, and Primorske. The enemy carried out airstrikes with guided bombs on the areas of the settlements of Orikhiv and Plavny. Russia is already actively operating on the territory of the North Atlantic Alliance. Here is a recent example of sabotage on the Polish railway. Warsaw was quick to announce preparations for war. The question is, will Poland have time to prepare? Our journalists will provide the answer in the next segment.
There's no need to make things up and, based on these inventions, form an opinion about Russia. There's no need to create the image of Russia as an enemy. They've made up this story that Russia wants to attack NATO. Have you completely lost your minds or what? You're as dumb as this table. Who came up with this? This is nonsense, you understand? Utter rubbish.
The Kremlin has begun preparations for war against Poland.
We are now closer than ever to open conflict since World War II.
This is a pre-war situation. The General Staff has announced a planned attack.
The aggressor has begun preparations for war. He is creating an environment meant to undermine public trust in the government, the army, and the police, in order to set the stage for potential aggression against Polish territory.
The Chief of the General Staff of Poland stated that recently there has been a significant increase in acts of sabotage and large-scale cyber attacks in the country. These events may indicate that Russia is creating conditions to destabilize the situation and weaken the state from within. One of the most recent such incidents was an explosion on the Warsaw-Lublin railway line.
Analyzing all the incidents that have taken place in Poland and Europe, one can say that all the traces lead east, to Muscovy.
Polish authorities believe that this episode and other similar cases bear the hallmarks of pre-planned operations that may be linked to the activities of foreign intelligence services.
The sabotage of the railway line on the Warsaw-Lublin route is an unprecedented act of subversion, directly targeting the security of the Polish state and its civilian population. We will catch those responsible, whoever they may be.
2 months prior to this, about 20 Russian drones entered Polish territory en masse for the first time. Poland's security services stated that the threat from the drones was more serious than the authorities had believed.
The claim that these were cardboard and paper objects is not entirely true.
The Polish leadership does not hide the fact that it is preparing for a direct confrontation.
We can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
Military analyst and former SBU officer Ivan Stupak is convinced that the Kremlin is already waging a hybrid war against Europe, and the only question is when it will escalate into an open conflict.
For Russia, what it is currently doing in Europe is already a war. Asymmetric, non-linear, hybrid. Call it whatever you want, but it is ongoing.
Poland's strategic position between the Kaliningrad region and Belarus makes it one of the key countries for the security of all of NATO. And Warsaw itself plays an important role in ensuring the defense of the eastern flank. Consequently, the defense of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will directly depend on the ability of Polish forces to respond promptly to potential threats.
Everything depends on our stance, whether we can deter the enemy or encourage them to act aggressively.
While most European countries spent many years discussing the potential threat from Russia, Poland was engaged in systematic and purposeful preparation. Over the past decades, Warsaw has significantly strengthened its military capabilities, and the buildup of its defense potential began immediately after Russia's annexation of Crimea.
While other countries waited to see who would make the first move, Poland took action.
In 2024, Poland's defense budget rose to 4.7% of its GDP. This is the highest figure among all NATO member states. The modernization of military equipment and the increase in troop numbers to more than 200,000 make the Polish army one of the largest in Europe. In addition, Poland has become one of the largest purchasers of weapons from the United States. The country has invested about $50 billion.
Without the United States, there is no alliance. We need to spend more on defense not to replace the Americans in Europe, but to keep them here.
Poles are tired of the war going on in the neighboring country, and as a result, their attitude toward Ukrainians is worsening. The Polish Minister of Defense stated that people are not seeing the main enemy, and those who incite against Ukraine are acting against Poland.
This should be valued and respected, not used to incite hostility toward Ukrainians in Poland or to stir up anti-German sentiment.
The chief of the Polish General Staff called for the creation of a Cold War 2.0 for large-scale investment in defense, and for making it clear to Moscow that any attack on NATO will be met with a decisive response. Now, the future of European countries depends on NATO's readiness to defend itself.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News, you'll see new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, gathered so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.